Hi, all. I was having a little bit of technical difficulty there. Please let me know if you are on, and we'll get started with the Small Business HR Q&A in just a few minutes. I know we can't tell who's on a Facebook Live session. I wish that we could. So if you get a chance to just maybe give a thumbs up and let us know who's here, that would be a great start. And then again, we just want to make sure that everybody who's trying to get on can get on since technical difficulties were in my court today. So we'll give just another minute or two before we start. Good, I see little bubbles of thumbs coming up, so that's a good thing. Got some people interested in the topic. Great. I think maybe just another minute, just to make sure people can get on, um, and then we'll go forward. I guess I can see how many people, so I'm learning. 16 so far. So again, let's give it a second here. Okay, so let's get started on what we're going to talk about today. So first of all, thank you for joining us today. As a part of the Long Beach Chamber of Commerce, it is our job. We are here in order to provide assistance and support and educate local businesses, not only to get through this situation, but to thrive and in general at any time during the year. So we are hoping that this webinar and this program is one in many to come that can help local businesses and provide some support to you. So my name is Gretchen Grotenthaler, and I'm an HR professional. I have over 2 decades of experience advising large corporations like AIG and Omnicom and providing HR guidance and consulting to small and mid-sized businesses in a number of industries. So that can look like advice on hiring and firing, employee relations, compliance, organizational development, training and development, employee engagement, etc., compensation, things like that. Many of you may recognize my name because I partnered with the Chamber of Commerce a couple of months ago in putting on a sexual harassment training for the city. And from that, I've worked with quite a few different people in terms of helping them with their HR challenges and issues. I am a member of the Long Beach Chamber of Commerce. And in addition to that, I am a certified coach. I'm a business coach and I'm a personal growth coach. So besides human resources offerings, I can also help you if you're looking to kind of get to where you want to go or help get through something and emerge a little differently and happier or more successful on the other side, whether it's coping with the issues that we're in now or other issues. Our goal today is really to help walk you through and answer questions about some of the new regulations that have come out. I would bet that many of you received posts from lawyers, from your benefits carriers, from your payroll companies, from friends about some of these new regulations. And there is a lot of information contained in all of that information that you received. So what I want to do today is I want to be able to give you a quick summary, just some of the highlights of those regulations, and then go through specific questions that you might have that pertain to your employees or how you deal with employees within the current situation that we're in. So I do want to say that I am not an employment attorney. I am not affiliated with any of the federal or government or agencies that are enforcing. I am simply an HR professional who has not only done a lot of research, attended many seminars and webinars, but also collaborated with a lot of my HR colleagues in how to interpret some of this information. I sent emails to the Department of Labor to try to find out how to interpret some of these. Haven't gotten all the answers yet, but I'm trying to make sure that I have enough information to share with you so that you can make educated decisions with your employees and paying your employees, et cetera, going forward. There are some newer regulations I don't have a lot of information about yet, and so I would prefer not to try to give you information on what I haven't fully researched at this point in time. Hopefully, I will answer most of the questions or many of the questions that are on your mind. If not, if there are other questions or if there are some particular situations that you would like to discuss privately, I will share my information at the end and we can go from there. So the format today is I will give you a brief overview of a couple of the new regulations, and then I will answer specific questions. I've received some questions already. We'll start with those. And then if you do type a question, I would ask that you maybe put an asterisk or a question mark in the beginning so I can distinguish between what's a comment and what's a question. Okay, so to start out with, let's talk about the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. That's the FFCRA. So this is supported by the federal government. It's for companies with less than 500 employees, and it pertains to essential employees who cannot work from home. Okay, so there are two categories within this. The first category is pay and job protection for employees who must take care of a child whose school is closed or daycare is closed, again, due to COVID. So they have pay and job protection for 12 weeks. The first 2 weeks are the employee's choice of whether or not they want to use their accrued and unused PTO, whether they want to use their 80 hours of COVID-related leave, but paid at 2/3 their normal rate, or whether they want to be unpaid. You as an employer cannot tell them what to use. They can pick one of those options. The next 10 weeks, you would pay them at 2/3 of their average pay or minimum wage, whichever is higher. So that's the first situation under the FFCRA. The second situation sounds a little convoluted because there's about 6 different bullet points here. But to sum it up, it is pay for employees who are quarantined or isolated due to, let's just say, an agency, so a federal, state, local, et cetera, due to an agency or a doctor, and this is for themselves, or who have symptoms or actually have COVID-19. So that's the first part of this. And for that, employees would be entitled to 80 hours of leave. It should be consecutive, okay, and it is only for COVID-related issues. The other part of this is if you're caring for someone in the same category. So we're caring for someone who's quarantined or isolated due to an agency or due to a doctor because they have symptoms or have the illness. And for that, the employee would be paid, because they're caring for another, at 2/3 of their pay or minimum wage, whichever is higher, for COVID-related issues. This also should be consecutive, although I did read something today that said this potentially could be intermittent. The pay and job protection due to childcare being closed or schools being closed can be intermittent. Okay, so that's just a brief synopsis, of the FFCRA. The next regulation is New York paid leave, specifically related to COVID. So there are a couple different areas here. The first, and this is supported by New York State, the first is a self. If you personally are quarantined or isolated, similar to what we talked about before, due to an agency or a doctor puts you out, there's a couple different ways in which you can be paid. So one way, how you will be paid is dependent upon the size of your organization. So if you are a small business with less than 10 employees and less than $1 million of net business income, then your employees would be able to use a combination of New York State paid family leave and New York State disability right away. So New York State paid family leave is 60% of pay, and disability would match to get them up to their full pay in most cases. Now, if you're a medium employer with 11 to 99 employees, or less than 10, but also more than $1 million in net business income, then the employee would need to use the first 5 days as sick leave that you would pay them. And then after that, they would go to a combination of the paid family leave and the New York State disability, just like above. The last category is large employers who are 100 or more. They have 100 or more employees, or public employers. And there is no New York State paid family leave involved there. You would just be allowing your employees to use 14 days of paid sick time. Okay, so that's for yourself. The second category of the New York paid leave surrounding COVID is taking care of a minor child who is quarantined or isolated, again through the government or because of their own symptoms or illness. And for that, that employee would be paid up to 60% of their pay. And if you're caring for a family member in similar situations, but not a minor child, it would go into the normal rules of New York State paid family leave. Okay, so there are those two. Let's talk briefly about a furlough. So if you choose to furlough your employees, a furlough is basically seen as what you believe to be a temporary layoff. You assume that business will resume, their jobs will resume, and you will be able to bring them back. Okay, couple different options in there, and this may not be exhaustive, but you can completely what I would call as a full furlough in terms of the person would not be working at all, no hours, no time. However, in any furlough case, you would put a letter forth when you furlough an employee of when you think this would change again. So if you said, I'm going to furlough you, you're not going to be working at all, and I foresee you returning May 1st. It doesn't hold you to that, but that's the letter that you would put out. So that would be more like a full furlough. You could also reduce an employee's hours or rotate days of the week. Note, this is only for non-exempt employees, and this is a very important distinction. Exempt or salaried employees, if they work even a single minute of work during a week, they must be paid their full weekly salary. Okay, so if you want to reduce hours or rotate days, like you have John working Monday, Tuesday, and you have Sally working Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, that could be a furlough so that you keep both people working, but you're not paying that full salary for both people. But that's only for non-exempt employees. You could also rotate weeks, and this could be for non-exempt or exempt employees. Let's say you want Trey to work the first 2 weeks of April, and you want Christine to work the second 2 weeks of April. You could do that with exempt or non-exempt employees, but you have to be 100% sure that those employees are doing no work when they're on furlough. Another point about furlough is employees may get unemployment. And a last piece is that you may be able to offer medical benefits to employees who are furloughed, but you have to check with your individual carriers. And if medical benefits are offered, you would pay it as the company to the carrier, but then you would collect the contributions from the employees for their part. And that is also the same in the case of paid family leave. So keep in mind, for paid family leave, you must continue their benefits, but you as the employer need to figure out before the person goes out how you want to collect those contributions from the employees. You can't just take it from them. You need to talk to them about how they want to pay it to you and or how it will be taken from them. Okay, so there's some pieces about furlough. Now, a layoff or a reduction in force is basically you're letting the employee go. You may or may not hope to return the position, but in a furlough, you're really hoping to. In a layoff, you probably are not. Make sure that you understand that a reduction in force, you should not replace that position. Reduction in force means the position is being eliminated. Okay, and so in both of these cases, employees or former employees may receive unemployment. With unemployment, as you are probably well aware, New York State has waived the 7-day waiting period. I know there is some more information out there, like the additional $600 that people are will be getting. I don't have more information on that at the moment. I've also heard some rumblings about independent contractors being able to receive unemployment. Again, I need to get some more information about it before I feel confident sharing it. One other piece that I want to make sure you remember is that if you reduced someone's pay, because you can reduce their pay right now as well, especially if it's in relation to cutting down their hours. If it's a non-exempt employee, you would probably going to keep their pay the same, maybe, and reduce their number of hours. An exempt level employee or a salaried employee, you could also reduce their wages. But keep in mind that if they are an exempt level employee, their salary cannot go below an annual salary of $35,568 or a weekly salary of $684, or they will be reclassified as non-exempt. And then make sure you are also aware of New York State minimum wage, which in New York City is $15 an hour. In Long Island and Westchester, it's $14 an hour. Make sure you know it goes up to 15 in 2021. And then for the rest of New York State, it is $12.50 an hour. So just keep those things in mind as you're going through, considering what you're going to do. I do have some questions that have come to me already. So let me go ahead and answer a couple of those. And then now that I've given you just sort of that brief synopsis of some of the regulations, please feel free to enter some questions that you may have. So probably the biggest question I have received is, can I fire an employee who refuses to come to work because they are afraid of contracting COVID-19? And the answer to that is most likely yes. You may want to look into alternatives to that, but basically if an employee, and remember, an essential employee who cannot work from home, so they cannot telework, they need to be physically present in order to do their job. If they refuse to come to work because they're afraid of catching it or they think other people might have it, etc., basically they need to come to work, and you could say to them, are you tendering your resignation then? Keep in mind that if they resign, they are not going to be eligible for unemployment. So as the employer, you then have the choice of whether or not you want to submit the termination reason to be terminated, to be involuntary, which would allow them to collect unemployment. So that is your choice. And to that, let's just talk about that for a moment. When an employee leaves your organization, you do need to submit a reason for that. If they resign, it's normally voluntary. If they are terminated for any reason, it's involuntary. And as I just mentioned, if it's they will not receive unemployment, or they shouldn't be eligible to receive unemployment if it's voluntary. So you really want to think about make sure that you're coding that properly. And usually with involuntary, there's an additional reason that you need to add, which helps the determination of whether or not someone receives unemployment. Now back to terminating someone. If someone doesn't qualify under the COVID-related reasons we discussed, so they are isolated themselves or caring for someone who's isolated by an agency, if they're not put out by a doctor, if their symptoms and illnesses are not corroborated by a doctor, and they're not taking care of a child who is no longer in school or has daycare coverage, then really if they're essential and they can't work from home, then you do have the option of releasing them from employment, and they are not eligible to receive the benefits that we talked about. I will tell you that I've had questions as well about whether or not you can terminate someone within this climate. And I actually did consult with some companies and had to terminate a number of employees in the last 2 weeks due to performance. The performance is not at all related to COVID-19. And I'm very surprised that employees at this point in time are coming to work and not doing what is required of them and not doing their job. And if that's the case and you need to terminate them, you still have a job. They should be doing their job. But if they're not and you need to terminate them for that reason, you should talk to an HR professional or legal counsel before you do it, but you would have the right to do it. In most cases, I would recommend that you have documentation to show that that employee was not performing or had deficiencies in their performance, attendance, et cetera, up to that point. So for example, for a couple of employees that I had to terminate recently, they were already on a written warning, and they violated that written warning, and it had nothing to do with COVID. So a cornerstone of human resources, documentation. Document, document, document. I swear we say that word all the time. It's so very, very important. And but if you have that documentation, I would still confer with an HR professional or an attorney before you terminate employment. But if you have that documentation, you probably have a lot more of an airtight supporting reason why that person was let go, even if they come back and said, oh, but I wasn't feeling well. So really think about that, but always have that documentation no matter what. Okay, so this is also something that's up for a little bit of debate. If an employee calls in sick, can they just stay home and self-quarantine themselves, or do we need some sort of proof? This is where it gets a little bit fuzzy. Normally, under sick leave, if someone is out for more than 3 days, you as a company may require them to submit a doctor's note before they are out additionally. It's a lot tougher right now for employees to be able to obtain doctor's notes if they're out sick. However, if they have symptoms of COVID or they're being treated for COVID, they've most likely gone to a doctor or they've had a test, and they should be able to obtain that documentation. And in most cases, I would say that as an employer, you want to see that documentation before you're paying some of this new leave that is coming out. However, I did read something today that said we don't have to have it. I don't have that exact answer for you at this time. I wish I did, but what I would say is any employee who believes that they are out because they have symptoms or they've contracted the disease, ask them with all the power that they have to get a doctor's note. I had employees in the last couple of weeks who they had that note. Doctors have this note ready to go. I had an employee who gave me one that said, I'm going to be out for, or I attest that this employee has some symptoms consistent with COVID, and I am putting them out for 3 days. It was a stock letter that doctor probably signed 20 times a day. So I would say try to get that and assess the situation as it comes, or talk to an HR professional or employment lawyer. But really, I would say that in most cases, you should be able to get that as long as they have COVID symptoms at this point in time and have been treated. Okay, so does the 80 hours of leave granted under the FFCRA start on 4/1? So today is 4/1, timely that we're doing this today. Officially, it goes into effect today. But let's say you had somebody who contracted the disease over the weekend, and so Monday and Tuesday of this week, they were out, and they'll be out for 14 days. That's the normal period that we're expecting before people most cases can come back. And of course, if they have the disease for longer, they can go on paid family leave. But that 80 hours, technically it starts over today. But I think from all the HR people and colleagues that I've spoken with, I think that at this point you could count Monday and Tuesday in that 80 hours. Again, I am not 100% sure of that, but at this point in time, that's how I am moving forward. The 80 hours does have to be consecutive. So the point is, if you've got someone out for 2 weeks, chances are they're not going to be back for a couple days and then out again. So I think you can count that. I'm not 100% sure. You may want to consider combining it with the sick leave that you already have, or talking to an employee about their other accrued time off, or again, letting them go forward and getting onto the paid family leave. Again, around that, can that 80 hours only be used for COVID-related reasons? And that answer is yes. That can only be used for COVID-related reasons. And it is in addition to the sick leave that they already have. So let's say we're all in New York, so your employee should have 5 days of sick time. Let's say that back in February, an employee took a day out because they had an injured back, or they took another day out in the beginning of March for a doctor's appointment. So those are 2 days subtracted from the 5 that they were given for the year. Now they develop COVID. They're out for 2 weeks, which is 80 hours. 10 days. And when they come back, let's say they come back after that 10 days, they still have 3 sick days left for the year. So the sick days, you can allow them to use that in addition if they wanted to be out for 13 days, or unless they wanted to go on the paid family leave. But the point is, they are 2 separate banks. And if they've already taken 2 days earlier in the year, you can't subtract that from the 10 days they get under the FFCRA. Okay. I think that covers some of that. I think we already answered this, but here's how do I compensate an essential employee who cannot come to work due to providing care for a child whose school or daycare has closed? Again, that would fall under the FFCRA. For the first 2 weeks, that employee has the choice of taking their accrued but unused paid time off, taking 2/3 of the 80 hours at their regular pay, 2/3 of their regular pay for 80 hours, or being unpaid. And then the additional 10 weeks, you would pay them 2/3 of their pay or minimum wage, whichever is higher. Now, keep in mind that there should be some tax credits that you'll be able to apply for to recoup that money, and check with your accountant and more regulations that come out as to that. Again, that's not my specialty, but there should be tax credits equal to the amount that you spend paying for employees who fall under some of these regulations, or for the medical premiums you are paying for employees whose medical has to be sustained during one of these regulations. So I would say documentation. Okay, there it is again. In addition to that, make sure you are keeping excellent records of employees who are out, how you are paying them so that you can look back. So one, you can maybe confer with someone and say, okay, this person was out for these reasons. Did I pay them the right way? And it's difficult. I have 5 or 6 employees out, and I have a whole spreadsheet going that I'm checking daily against their vacation balances and against what the COVID regulations are. But you want to know what you're paying them for, how much you're paying them for, keep track of the medical contributions and premiums that you're paying, and then you should be able to get a tax credit back for that at the end of the year. Oh, and by the way, paid family medical leave is not paid by the employer. And you probably know this because you set up your payroll if you're small to medium-sized companies. That is actually a deduction taken from employees, and that is funded by employees themselves. Okay, so again, if I furlough an employee, do I still need to provide medical benefits? That depends on your carrier. So if I were you, you may have already done this, or your medical carrier may have told you. I'm sorry, benefits carriers, but make sure you reach out, whether it's medical, dental, vision, short-term disability, long-term disability. Reach out to all of those carriers and see what your setup with them is on whether or not they offer benefits for a furloughed employee. But keep in mind, again, I will repeat this. If an employee is furloughed and medical benefits can be continued, or if an employee is on New York State paid family medical leave, and you have to for paid family leave, but you continue paying their medical benefits as a company, you must work with the employee on how you're going to collect their contributions. You could pay it yourself, but in most cases, you're going to want to turn around to the employee and say, okay, how are we going to recoup the money for that? All right, a question. Do any of these programs apply to a sole proprietor or the owner and operator? Yes, it does. Again, independent contractors is sort of a different story. So I'd have to sort of talk to an individual about which way you're looking at that, but everything that we talked about today, it's not just some of the regulations that have come out in the past, including FMLA, et cetera. It depends on how many employees you have. These are not. So, for example, in New York paid family leave, it's 0 to 10 employees. So I don't know why you'd have 0 employees, but that even counts if you have 1 employee. And the same thing for the federal Coronavirus Response Act. It is any employer less than 500 employees. So yes, it absolutely does. So definitely on that one. All right. We talked about which employee situations would allow an employee to collect unemployment or an ex-employee. How will you be compensated as a small business for paying the 80 hours of sick time or the 2/3 for someone who's caring for someone sick? Again, that's going to be the tax credits. All right. So that is the majority of the questions that I have received so far. Are there any other questions that anyone has before we end this session that you want to know? I think the one thing I would say about HR in general and handling a lot of these situations, use these as guidelines, use these as an interpretations, but almost every situation to me is a case-by-case basis. You need to take a look at it. It's not just a formula to spit out and to be able to utilize for every single employee. Use the resources that you have. Use your legal counsel. Use someone like myself. Use other companies and how they've done this in the past. It really is not just a blanket statement, but these are some really good guidelines. I think these are some really good things to help employees get paid, but I know it's going to be really tough for small businesses to be able to pay for these to stay alive. Okay, any other questions right now? Let me just make sure I'm not getting any others in a different format. All right, so as I mentioned before, the Chamber really does want to help out and to be able to help you through this situation. If there are any suggestions that you have on how the Chamber can help more or how we can be of better service to you, please feel free to email us and let us know directly, and we will try to implement some things. We are constantly trying to think of ways that we can be more helpful to you, but it would be very advantageous if you let us know from your standpoint how we could make a bigger impact on you during this time. Let me provide you with my contact information in case you have some additional questions. You can reach me either through pr@thelongbeachchamber.com or I will type in my email address because most people cannot spell Grotenthaler. It is ggrotenthaler6@gmail.com. And my phone number, my business number is 917-688-3788. My business is called Energy, Human Resources and Coaching, and I would be very happy to help you get through the situation and in general to be a resource for you. Thank you very much, and stay well.